These videos only happen because of the support and help from our sponsors. If you need insurance for your bike, go and check out Bike Devil. Support the companies that support us. This is not a new Triumph Speed Triple. This is in fact an original Speed Triple. This is one of the first generation bikes that ran from 94 to 96. 885cc, 93 horsepower, 225 kilos. Somewhat eclipsed by the release of the new model that Triumph just announced, but an interesting bike nonetheless. And we've got a little bit of a video later on riding this and seeing what it's like riding something that's a quarter of a century old in reflection of what the new one's expected to achieve. Now, we've already been up to the factory. We've been to meet the guy who was kind of the chief designer on the new Speed Triple RS, Stuart Wood. Spent a little bit of time chatting with him, did a little interview. Again, when you're sat talking to the guy who's just spent 4 years of his life grafting to make a bike, of course he believes it is truly the best bike on the planet. Of course he truly believes it's the best Speed Triple ever made, because he's just spent a lot of time making it so. And it's easy to get kind of wrapped up in their, their spec sheets and their words and the bits they want to push on the bike. So we thought we'd have a little bit of a more informal look at the bike and work our way through what bits we think are going to be really good and maybe the bits that may be missing from that bike. Now, the first big jump on the new Speed Triple is always the power. That new generation one, the latest RS, is 180 horsepower. From 150 on the previous version, and 93 on this, it's moved on. It brings that old argument of how much power do you need on a road bike? That depends entirely down to how you like to ride it. But more than that, I think it depends on how the power is delivered. Now, Triumph is saying that their 180 horsepower 3-cylinder bike is smooth, easy to ride, lots and lots and lots of mid-range, which is what you really want on the road, that nice drive out the corner. And they're saying it's not a mega aggressive engine. They're saying it's a smooth, powerful engine that makes really good peak power, but power throughout the range. That's something that's going to be really interesting to put to the test. 180 horsepower is a lot of horsepower on a motorcycle for the road, and it's exactly the sort of power that you hit the throttle out of a corner and before you know it you're doing 100 mile an hour plus, which some people love, some people don't. And again, that comes down to what you want out of a bike. Riding this today was interesting because it's the opposite end of the spectrum. If you want to get to 100 mile an hour, you've got to take 3 or 4 gears and a lot of time on full gas. And it gives you more time to enjoy the bike and the acceleration, but you don't go as quick. You don't get that adrenaline rush from the sudden kick in the pants. So it's going to be interesting to see what they've done with this Speed Triple RS. Lots and lots of bikes in the hyper naked category now are pushing those sorts of power figures. Interestingly, BMW with the S1000R has kept their bike down at 165 horsepower, while Ducati and KTM have gone chasing the big number. Ducati, in fact, has gone mental and gone 200 horsepower. So it's going to be interesting to see if the Triumph can tread a really nice middling line there, which historically Triumph has been very good at doing. They've been really, really good at making bikes that are very relevant, very easy to ride, and not too far mental one way or dull the other. So we're hoping they've stuck with that and they can have done as good a job with that as they historically have done with their bikes. Now, looking down the rest of the bits on that bike, the reason that kind of got us thinking about the original Speed Triple is if you put a picture of this bike and a picture of the new Speed Triple RS side by side, it's a really obvious family of bikes. The styling cues taken from this and carried to the new bike are really obvious. I was surprised Triumph didn't make more of a thing about it. A lot of manufacturers these days love to bang on about the heritage and love to, oh, this is where we've come from. Triumph didn't make a massive thing about it. For sure they mentioned their heritage with the Speed Triples, but points like if you look at the side of the engine on this bike and the exposed radiator, then look at the brand new bike, it's gone back to this sort of style. All engine, nice flat radiator, no big louvres or radicals down the side of it. They've moved to the lower exhaust again. They've moved to a sort of slightly flatter pillion seat shape. All these things that when you put them side by side think, wow, they really have been looking at the original and going, we like that, let's get back to there. And I think that's a really nice touch. Looking overall at the Speed Triple RS, there's interesting when you read any of the press documents or the bits they sent out, Triumph said all new. So it was an all new chassis, all new engine, which is awesome and has made a big difference in the performance. What's really interesting is that they kept saying things like it's got a new inertia measurement system for the ABS and traction control. It's like, the last one had that. And then they said, oh, it's got Öhlins suspension now. And you're like, the last one had that too. It was interesting reading the press pack. They kept saying about all these new things, and it was like, well, you've always had them. You had them on the last Speed Triple RS, and the bits that were genuinely new, they didn't feel like they made a bigger deal out of. Maybe that's because they went for the headlines of Öhlins suspension and shiny traction control rather than the boring detail bits of how they made the modifications inside the engine. One thing that is new on the new Speed Triple is it's now got a two-way quick shifter, which is a step on from the last bike. I think you could get a quick shifter for shifting up on the old one, but you couldn't get an up and down quick shifter, which has kind of become the norm in that class of bike now. Now, Triumph for saying the bike's going to be in dealers mid-March. Fingers crossed we can actually go out and ride them by then, and fingers crossed between now and then they get us some bikes to test, go and do some wheelies and skids. And the things we want to test on that bike are, is it still a great road bike? The Speed Triple's always been a brilliant, fun sports road bike. And I think over and above everything else, that's what the new bike needs to hit the mark on. That class has got a lot of bikes that are either incredible track bikes, massively hooligan bikes, or bikes that have something that really stands out, like the supercharger on the Kawasaki, for instance. And I think the Triumph's standout feature has always been how it rode as a road bike. And that, for me, is what I really want to see on the new one. I want to see that it's just taken that great road bike and made it a bit faster, a bit sharper, and, you know, a bit more playful to ride. The next thing will be, how hooligan is it? And is that hooliganism well placed or not? That'll be the next thing to test on it, is to see actually, can it hang with the big boys, the high horsepower bikes in the class? Can it be as wild as them? Can it deliver that same, oh my God, feeling of hitting the throttle and it disappearing off towards the horizon? So those two things are what we've really got to put to test when they finally get us some bikes to test and launch. And until then, I'm going to go and take this 25-year-old version out of the Speed Triple and see where all that nonsense, madness and character came from. So, this is not the new Triumph Speed Triple RS. It couldn't be more not the new Speed Triple RS. This is a 1996 Triumph Speed Triple. We're harking back to the very first Street Triples here. They did come out slightly before this one, but this is that original model. Some 25 odd years on. And what an experience it is to ride. This is the first one of these I've ever ridden. And the first impressions are completely bonkers. In these days where we always talk about how, you know, bikes are easy to ride and comfortable and they put the ergonomics right, I love it that in these days they kind of didn't care. They just went, this is what we're going to make. It's going to be long, huge reach to the handlebars, low, aggressive, and if you don't like it, go and buy a Pan-European. Oh, what a lovely engine it is. So this Speed Triple, it's a naked bike, single headlight. None of these twin headlights that they've become known for. But the first thing you notice that's so different to where these sorts of bikes have gone to now is it's got clip-on handlebars. This was a naked sports bike. Powerful engine, fully adjustable suspension, sharp chassis, and clip-ons. It just didn't have any fairings to scratch when you dropped it. So rather than that kind of sat up looking over the traffic feeling you get on modern naked bikes, this thing, you're tucked right down onto it. You're in full Grand Prix position, which with no fairing to hide behind, feels quite fun. Feels almost cafe racery, I guess. Oh, there's a reason everyone fell in love with these 3-cylinder engines. Just make a glorious sound. So the riding position, as I said, I'm fully tucked up here. My heels are up by my bum. My hands are lower than my knees almost, it feels that way. And I'm stretched out along the thing like I'm laying on a bench. It's really long. I wondered where the handlebars were when I got on it earlier. I couldn't reach them. It smells good too. I fired it up in my garage when I got it home and stank the place out in a matter of seconds. I tell you what, you might not like all the Euro regulations, but it does mean you can run a bike indoors without suffocating. So what is the old Speed Triple actually like to ride? Well, it's old. There's no getting around that. You've got carburetors, you've got a choke lever to remember how to use one of them. Even just the sound of the starter motor, everything does sound a few generations old, which it is, so it's no surprise. Does that equate to less fun? Not really, no. It's definitely less kind of thrill and adrenaline to riding this. When you ride a modern Speed Triple, hopefully even more so on the next one, but you know, they've got that buzz, that real exciting riding where they're fast, they're nimble, they handle well, everything's a lot more alive. On an older bike like this, everything's a lot slower paced. It doesn't steer as fast, doesn't accelerate as fast. It sure as hell does not stop as fast. It's a very different riding experience. You enjoy the acceleration. You kind of listening to the motor, listening for any misfires, any pops or farts. When you shut the gas, it's burbling and stinking and popping, banging on the overrun, and you can smell it. As soon as you pull up anywhere, leave it idling, you can smell how rich the engine runs, and that stuff adds to a much different experience from riding a modern bike. If you're sat there on a Sunday morning thinking, I'm going to go for a blast and I'm looking for a bit of fun, a bit of a buzz, this will be fun, but a new bike will be more fun. If you want a bike that kind of you fall in love with and you like fiddling with all the little bits and pieces and you enjoy the ride for the partnership of man and machine, for one of a less fluffy phrase, that's where an old bike is an absolute winner. You really feel much more a part of it. If you're worried about getting speeding fines, you'll still get one on this as much as you will on a new bike. You still can end up over the speed limit every time you open the throttle for any length of time. It just takes more effort to do so. I was actually very surprised by this. Being a big old lump, a proper brute of a British muscle bike, I thought it was going to be heavy, awkward, and have a hissy fit the first time I put it into a bumpy corner. It really didn't. It was really well behaved. It's a really easy bike to ride. Over the bumps it was compliant, but then it wasn't wallowy when you threw it around a bit more aggressively. It actually really surprised me. For a 25-year-old bike, it still handles well, it still rides brilliantly. The biggest thing I'd change about it if it was mine, I'd sort the brakes out. That's the one thing that when you're actually riding and making a bit of progress, you're always nervous that if you do have to stop in a hurry, you're going to struggle with these. It's probably a little bit of 25-year-old brakes. They will have been looked after and serviced at some point, but it could just be wear and tear, but actually some upgrades and trying to get a bit more braking performance would turn this thing into an absolutely brilliant fun backroad bike. I can't wait to ride the new one, but for now, the old one has been an absolute hoot. I'm going to sit and polish it for a few hours now to thank it for my time.